It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. We've been discussing rising gas prices due to the U.S. and Israel's war against Iran and how it highlights our reliance on fossil fuels. Inquiries for new EVs have risen more than a quarter since the war began. But EVs need to be charged. And that's easier to do in some places. If you're in China, you can charge an EV in just a few minutes. Now, back here in Michigan, we're way behind that reality. But despite the Trump administration's distaste for EVs, the infrastructure for electricity is improving. The number of charging ports in the state grew by about 1,800 last year. That's the most significant uptick in 1 year. So if you're thinking about buying or leasing an EV, what does this all mean for you? Sophia Schuster is the policy principal for the Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council. She joins me now. Sophia, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me, Robin.
So first off, where are most public charging stations in the state here in Michigan?
Yeah, so you can kind of think about the state. I mean, obviously, we all know the mitten. There's sort of an L that goes from Detroit all the way up to Traverse City. And so there's a lot of really great charging, fast charging and level 2 charging that's deployed across the state along that L. What we really could use, though, more is rural charging and more charging in multifamily housing developments, too, to encourage folks who don't have access to at-home charging so that they can get access to at-home charging in their housing development.
I wonder, too, if it's also just about the visibility of the charging stations and how much that becomes like vital messaging for people, right? It's like if I'm being reminded all the time of these EV charging stations, it reminds me that EVs exist. It reminds me that there is this alternative to me paying $4 a gallon for gas.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we saw that even back when gas-powered vehicles came to be. If you didn't see a gas station, you wouldn't feel comfortable buying a car that required gas to operate it. So in the same way, you do need to see public EV charging, even though 80% of charging occurs at home. Having that public charging really alleviates fears for drivers who are interested in EVs, who may be a little bit fearful about that transition. And so that's why public charging is still really vital in this transition to EVs.
I want to think a little bit more about public charging because around the country last year, the number of fast charging sites, public stations that can recharge an EV quicker than a plug-in in a homeowner's garage can, those grew by roughly 87%. So I'm wondering, is that due to money that the Biden administration distributed through, it was back in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because you think about the bipartisan infrastructure law and the development of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Grant Program. All of those were announced in 2021 and 2022. And we're really just starting to see the fruition of that money come into play now. In Michigan, we were awarded $106 million to deploy charging across the state. There are 7 stations operational today, but that took a lot of time between when the Michigan Department of Transportation was able to get the funding from the U.S. Department of Transportation, work through all of the applications, and then finally energize those stations. So, it definitely takes time to get to having those stations be operational, but it's really exciting to see how much charging infrastructure is being deployed now across the state.
You said $106 million is in the state coffer for EV charging stations to be built, but only 7 so far have been built. That sounds really like a slow-moving process.
It is a very slow-moving process. And, well, you think about it. So when I'm going to call it the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, we call it NEVI in the industry. When the NEVI program was deployed, every state who wanted to access this money had to go through a planning process, and they needed to submit their plan to the U.S. Department of Transportation. That needed to get approved. This happened in several stages. And so you can imagine in each state that has a department like the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or the Michigan Department of Transportation, who is managing the NEVI program, they had to stand up the program. They had to hire staff to manage it. They had to hire staff to become experts in something that they were not familiar with. So that itself took time. So there's the administrative element. Then you also have the actual contracting process, which can really take a lot of time. It actually takes the most time when you talk about getting the site selected, getting the contract approved, having the utility approve the energy that is available in that for that particular site. That can take anywhere from 6 months to 24 months, depending on the location. So it's really not surprising that even though this money started getting deployed in June of 2024, that we're not really seeing it come to reality until now.
Okay, so you're saying that it's more a matter of there just being a lot of stakeholders involved, that you don't actually see this as perhaps some people involved not having the appetite or like dragging their feet to do this. This is just a matter of bureaucracy and processes.
Yeah, I would definitely say that's the case. And Michigan does have an older distribution system, so there are, depending on where the site is for a specific fast charging station, there might be transformer upgrades that are required. And as we know from the war in Ukraine, there was a lot of supply coming from Ukraine for transformers. So that slowed things down. And so we had a lot of delays in this, what should have been a good process. And there were just a lot of delays. And I think a lot of that does unfortunately come from the utility side when it's in the energization stages to work with the utility.
How many more charging stations should come from this $107 million?
So there have been 2 full rounds awarded. So there have been 82 sites selected. And then just 2 weeks ago, the Michigan Department of Transportation was approved for its final awards, $51 million. So that should be opening up in the spring. They're expecting about 60 more sites to come online with that. So in total, we should be looking around 140, 150 stations. And, the number of ports is going to vary depending on the site.
Sophia Schuster, you have a lot of numbers in your head and you're recalling them pretty easily. I mean, I see you have some notes, but I do not see you looking at those notes that frequently. Okay, so I'm a EV driver. Mm-hmm. I wish I was an EV driver. Let me be transparent here. And so I have access to 3 different types of chargers. There's the DC fast charger, and that charges within 20 to 40 minutes. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a dream. Okay, then there's the level 2 chargers. This is a little more cumbersome and takes some planning. We're talking about charging within 4 to 10 hours. Mm-hmm. And then there are the level 1s. Yes. I'm saying that very slowly because that's going to take 1 to 2 days. What are the most common public chargers in Michigan that I'm going to come into contact with as an EV driver in my EV fantasy world?
So it depends on what you're doing. If you're traveling, if you're, going up, if you're taking a really nice vacation along the coast of Lake Michigan, you're probably going to rely pretty heavily on DC fast chargers because you're stopping, you want to get on your way. DC fast chargers are great for that kind of stop and go commuter travel if it's needed. Level 2s, though, are really underestimated, and they're fantastic chargers because they can be in your home or they can be out in public settings. They're really well served in like shopping complexes where you're going to be sitting for quite some time. And, at home, if you're using at-home charging, it's actually significantly cheaper than public charging. You can charge overnight, take advantage of time of use rates that, basically you're charging at a lower cost than what you would for normal electricity.
I'm thinking about the fact that there are free charging stations at multiple rec centers
Yeah.
in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Please tell me that we're going to see more of that and not less of it.
We should see more of it, especially, there's a lot of benefit for bringing charging into a local community. It's been shown to generate a lot of business to a local community and draw foot traffic in. So the numbers are actually escaping me at this moment. I believe, though, for every extra minute spent charging, there's another $1 spent in a retail setting.
Wow.
And so that speaks to a lot of business owners. They might not necessarily recoup the costs from the charging itself immediately, but they are going to start seeing increased revenue by drawing in EV drivers who are willing and interested in spending money and have to spend more time to charge. So they're just they're spending longer in those places than they normally would.
So it's drawing people potentially into the so-called public square and
Yes.
into communities to spend more time around each other and to spend time stimulating the economy and shopping potentially. Of course, an argument both for community and capitalism here.
Yeah.
But for the charging stations that are not free, what are you likely to spend for an EV charge at a public station?
So it depends if it's a DC fast charge or a level 2. So anything that is going to draw less energy, fewer kilowatts, is going to be cheaper. You can probably, if I was charging overnight, it's going to vary depending on where you're from. I guess I'll transition to the public fast charging. Public fast charging is going to depend kind of time of day, but you can probably expect to charge your car at around the same rate to fill up a gas tank maybe a couple weeks ago, not right now. It is definitely cheaper to fill up your EV at a public station than it is to fill up your gas tank at this moment.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. My guest is Sophia Schuster. She's the policy principal for the Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council. We're discussing the state of EV chargers in Michigan and how to increase them as we all stare down these rising gas prices. So when it comes to public chargers, what are the biggest obstacles right now to deploying more fast charging stations, which of course are going to be the most alluring? Because I'm sure for you, Sophia, watching what's happening right now in China and other countries and how they are just driving so fast toward this EV future. And meanwhile, it feels a little bit like the U.S. is like in first gear here. Like it's hard for us to shift into second or third gear.
Yeah. So I think some of the biggest challenges that we're faced with come back to the utility. And it's not, and I don't say that to point fingers at the utility. There's a lot of equipment that needs to get upgraded to serve those DC fast chargers. It takes time to purchase that equipment. Sites need to be evaluated, and there needs to be contracting. Sometimes the local permitting process takes time because a lot of times DC fast charging stations have been miscorrectly labeled as a fueling station. So it's basically called the same thing as a gas station. There are a lot of safety considerations there that should not be needed for a fast charging station. And so that's
wait, hold on. So charging stations are getting treated like a gas station,
Yes.
which includes massive amounts of flammable liquids.
Yes. Yeah. And because Michigan has, the zoning and local permitting codes are done locally. There's not a state zoning code. Because of that, there's not really kind of a roadmap for all of the different local communities, some of whom have encountered charging, some of whom have not. And for those who have not, I think it's hard to get everyone to understand that while this is a fueling station, it's not the same as a gas station. There are not the same safety considerations that we need to take into account. So I think that's also playing a huge factor in how long things are taking.
Sophia, should we be trying to get cities to build these charging stations instead of private companies? I mean, is there any reason to believe that the government can do this work more effectively than private entities?
I understand that logic, and actually we are seeing a lot of cities get a lot of awards. So there was federal money through the Clean Fueling and Infrastructure Program that was also federal, and then we also had state money that was awarded to a variety of cities. And we have seen cities get funding for these stations. I think that's where you're probably going to see more of those free charging stations or really, really low cost charging stations. But I do think at the end of the day, it is really important to still work with the experts in industry who are better able to assess what charging is needed where. And that's something that, requires a lot of partnership with private sector.
Okay, so in the ideal world, this is a lot of public-private partnerships,
yes,
which we know in many different spheres that those tend to be really successful. I mean, when you look at housing, for example, it's a lot of public and private partnerships that are able to bring together like a diversity of affordable housing stock, for example. So that makes sense, but that takes a lot of agreement. And this is a partisan issue, unfortunately, much to, I'm sure, your chagrin. I mean, liberals and Democrats tend to be much more interested in EVs and EV infrastructure than conservatives. Now, you're part of a trade group. When you speak to conservatives, what do they say to you about not being interested in EVs? I know some are. I've certainly spoken to some myself. But what's some of the pushback that you're getting?
I think there's just still a lot of skepticism around the technology and what it's capable of. And I think there's also maybe some hesitation around we've been dependent, as you were saying on your previous segment, we've been dependent on oil and gas for decades now. And so any kind of transition away from that, there are business implications that folks are concerned about. But
what kind of business implications?
You're moving away from oil and gas. So therefore, oil and gas that has been very present in our political reality, they don't like that EVs are getting more.
Right. This is sort of residuals of or echoes of kind of like the drill baby drill slogan that we heard that hasn't fully left us.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I really, when we talk to policymakers, whether it's on the left or the right, we really try to focus on the affordability aspect. While EVs have historically been more expensive, they are becoming more accessible to lower and medium income households, which is fantastic. So it's not just the rich man's plaything, which I think it was originally. And so what we really would love to see is for folks who do fall into low and middle income, being able to leverage all the benefits that EVs have to offer. So there's the affordability aspect. Of course, you have the environmental benefits too. On a national scale, though, there are energy independence and national security considerations that we really can't ignore, because the more domestically produced electricity that we have, the more all of our drivers and the businesses that rely on transportation for operating their business, that's a national security issue. And if we can increase EV adoption and kind of help those two things, I think those are some winning messages that we need to start pushing more.
Sophia Schuster is the policy principal for the Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council. Sophia, thanks for joining me on the Metro.
Thanks for having me, Robin.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Coming up, there are a lot of Republicans running for governor in Michigan. We're going to learn about one of them next. Stay with us.